Hello. I hadn't really intended to make this video, but I thought it would be an interesting focus point. Um, I say, I watched the film Suffragette last night. It was a film I thought was very moving. I thought it was a very powerful film, and I'm pleased I went to watch it. Um, you can check out my review. I believe it's the last video I uploaded on that film. Um, so anyway, I've looked again at the trailer for it, and it's interesting reading some of the comments there. Um, it's quite obvious that well, one of the main things that's come up, which is sort of a non-political issue, but an acting issue, is the fact that people believe that Meryl Streep will once again be nominated rather than Carey Mulligan, even though Meryl Streep had a much shorter role in the film. Um, and there was a little bit of criticism that Meryl Streep was kind of headlined as one of the central cast members, when in actual fact she had something like a 5 minute sequence. Um, Personally, I think the best acting that I saw in the film was Carey Mulligan. So that's my own view. Anyway, that's not what I want to discuss. I want to discuss the contrast as I see it, and as many other people see it actually, between the suffrage movement, women's suffrage movement specifically, because we sometimes forget actually the word suffrage was used earlier for men's suffrage during the Chartist movement. But the suffragette movement, as we know it today, is very much associated with the women's suffrage movement, which of course came later. Um, was really in the forefront later because this had been, as the film points out, women had been peacefully pushing for this for decades. That is true. Um, anyway, I want to discuss a bit of the contrast between that time and some of the focus that feminist groups take today, because I do believe there's a huge contrast. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of this film is going to be that certain feminist groups will hijack it for their own agenda, i.e., to try and claim that the situation is just as bad today, which is utterly preposterous. It's not even close. Um, Now, the film shows some quite harrowing scenes, like the scene where they force feed Carey Mulligan. It's essentially torture. Um, to all extents and purposes. And this really did happen to British women at the time. The suffragettes were cruelly lampooned in caricatures. They were treated as insane. Um, they were given quite a rough ride on it. It is true that they used some questionable techniques, including sabotage campaigns. Um, as far as I know, no one ever died in those campaigns. Although when Emily Davidson threw herself in front of the horse, the jockey was probably injured. So to say that there was never any harm caused wouldn't be quite accurate. Um, but as the character of Hilda Bonham Carter says in the film, they've left us no choice. It's a bit like when Mandela's faction in South Africa, when the ANC started to use violent techniques because they felt that they had no other choice. Generally speaking, I am not a proponent of direct action as a first method, but I do believe that when all else has failed, you need to look at it in that context. So I've seen some people, some guys, for example, say, "Oh, they were just terrorists." That's pretty unfair. A, not all of the suffragettes agreed with that approach, and B, you have to consider that there was, this was a basic human rights campaign that they were advocating for. So um, I'm a little bit annoyed with some of the MRA responses to the film because I think they're. I mean, for example, I saw one guy say, "Oh, why are they not including the White Feather campaign?" Well, look, anyone who's seen my track record online will know that I've been very fair in terms of discussing men's issues. And as a man myself, of course, I'm aware of what happened. I'm aware of the Feather campaign, but the 1910s was an extremely turbulent decade. A lot of things happened in that time. You simply can't include every detail in a 2-hour film, and it would detract from the main point of the film. I mean, it's true that happened, but the White Feather campaign has been featured in films. Like I said in the previous review, the suffrage movement has not really been featured in films that much. Of course, the White Feather campaign happened. Of course, it's important. But another point about that, suffragettes themselves were divided. As I understand it, Sylvia Pankhurst fell out with her mother. She was very much opposed to the war. Her mother even put aside suffragist activities whilst the war was going on. So it's unfair to accuse all the suffragettes of kind of glorifying in the death of young men. That's ridiculous. Many of them, another example is Vera Brittain, as featured in the film Testament of Youth. I mean, she saw some of her best friends killed in the war, her male friends. So this caricature that the suffragettes were anti-men is very unfair. And frankly, MRAs that are peddling that line are not really helping their case. And this is a film about a basic human rights campaign. It's a film about one of the most important social movements in our history. In my view, it's an important film, and a very moving film. Um, is it 100% accurate? Maybe not. But then tell me one historical film that is. And I felt the portrayal of Lloyd George was a little bit unfair. It portrayed him as slightly weak and like too two-faced, and that's not entirely accurate. I think they could have focused slightly more on Lloyd George, i.e., maybe his disappointment that the bill hadn't gone through, that sort of thing. But overall, I think it's a powerful film. Um, Abby Morgan's also directed The Iron Lady, among other films. But um, what I was going to talk about is a contrast with this movement and feminist groups today. The suffragettes were campaigning for the equal vote. Now, that can't be understated. The right to vote is empowerment. Now, you could argue that men at the time also had to do tough jobs and so on, and that's true. Men had to go down mines, and as we know, men were enlisted, died in the millions, and so on and so on. Life wasn't perfect for men either, but the key difference was having the vote was an act of empowerment. So whatever else you could say, at least men had the right to express their opinion through vote. Women did not have that basic right. There's no escaping that fact. It's I don't think it can be underestimated, and I think MRAs are trivializing it when it really isn't a trivial issue. Um, Also, in regards to the film, it didn't demonize men. It did show men who were sympathetic to the movement, such as Helena Bonham Carter's husband. It showed him in a very sympathetic light. So, I wonder if some of these people rush into judgment about the film before they've seen it. I am pleased to watch the film because otherwise I may have been doing the same thing. This is an intelligent film, and it isn't, it's not entirely what you might expect. And it does show risks of. Anyway, moving ahead to today, it can very much be seen that feminist groups today use their cause celebre as issues that could not be more different than basic human rights issues. Um, whilst feminist groups do also focus on important issues like domestic violence, which are important issues, they very much allow issues like, for example, the so-called objectification of women to become their cause celebre. I think this is a big mistake. Why? Because firstly, it's a false notion that all women have an issue with that when all women don't. Secondly, some of the tactics that modern feminists use amount to just outright bullying. Um, the Matt Taylor case is now well documented, whereby feminists publicly shamed him and bullied him into making a public apology when he should have been enjoying his moment of scientific achievement. That was an utter disgrace. Um, and and time again, feminism is being exemplified by actions like this. Another example is Charlotte Proudman and how she made a mountain out of a molehill because a man complimented her. I honestly believe that the original suffragettes, many of them would be turning in their grave if they knew the sort of thing that was being done supposedly in the name of women's rights. This is not to say that there are not women's issues out there. There are, especially in certain parts of the world where women are treated like dirt, although in many cases men are as well. I mean, in another video, I mentioned how in Congo women are used as weapons of war. They are, but young boys are forced to work down mines in terrible conditions, like copper mines. We all know about the notorious Blood Diamonds situation. Um, so the truth is, in today's world, and especially in countries like the United Kingdom, there are issues that impact women, but there are at least many issues that impact men. Now, the film showed how her young son was taken away from her, and the sort of pain that she went through with that. But I could not help thinking, watching that, that is exactly what a lot of men go through today. Um, so you could argue that today men actually suffer far more in terms of disproportionate issues. I mean, women have full equal legal rights. That is a fact. There may be areas where there's still not 50-50 equality, but the legal, there's no legal prevention there. So, for example, with women in parliament, there's nothing legally stopping women from standing as candidates, and every party tries to get more women candidates. So it's a phony argument to say that's an equality issue because it just isn't. You know, when feminists try to use that as an equality issue, they're distorting the facts because absolutely nothing is preventing women from standing for parliament. Um, but if you look at areas that disproportionately impact men, like homelessness, like suicide, like incarceration, how often do we hear about those issues disproportionately impacting men? Never. We maybe hear about the issues themselves. Less often do we hear about the fact that they disproportionately impact men. So I would argue that men's issues are hugely overshadowed, and that is why the MRA movement has emerged. Now, the reason I don't describe myself as an MRA is not because I don't believe in men's rights. I do. Of course I do. As a fellow man, I'm very concerned about that. But I don't like some of the language and the divisive approaches certain MRA groups use. I think it's just as bad as feminism in that sense. Um, because whenever any women's issues are discussed, MRAs immediately get on the defensive and try to contradict it. And I think that's misguided. What I want to see and what I advocate is a genuinely egalitarian movement where men's issues are addressed, where women's issues are addressed, and where men and women work together. If you constantly peddle a divisive agenda, this applies to both feminists and certain MRA groups, then all it's going to do is polarize the opposite sex. That's all it's going to do. So, for example, the Father's Rights campaign is very important, and there's many women that support that. But when MRAs come out with statements that try to contradict, for example, that rape happens, and I have seen this, all that does is make them look like misogynists. So MRAs, you need to be responsible, and that means that when women's issues are brought up, don't just trivialize them and say that they're irrelevant. Of course, talk about men's issues, but I just think it's the wrong approach because it becomes just as divisive as feminism. And you know, this is not me siding with feminism. The vast majority of my videos on the subject of gender issues are critical of feminism. So all I'm saying is that by all means campaign for these issues, but consider some of the language that is used. I mean, domestic violence is a real issue. It does happen. Yes, men are impacted as well, but when MRAs try to imply that it doesn't happen to women, that's, you know, seriously, that's not going to help anyone. Um, what else can I say? Yeah, so the issue with me is that feminist groups today focus on issues that really are pale in comparison to real human rights issues. When they obsess over objectification, they ignore the fact that the women in these campaigns are exercising their freedom to make the choice to do that with their own bodies. So what gives feminists a right to dictate to them? You know, the suffragettes were campaigning for women to have freedom of conscience, to have the vote. They certainly weren't campaigning for all women to agree. So That's where the feminist movement, I believe, has went wrong. Where it bullies under other women into conformity, where it bullies people into you have to say you're a feminist to prove that you're egalitarian. This is utterly absurd. It's obnoxious and it is absurd. And I do think this is gradually being highlighted. I do think there's an increasing number of people starting to see that actually the feminist movement today is quite uses bullying tactics. It shouts people down. It doesn't slavishly agree with it. It slanders any man who doesn't agree as being a misogynist pig, even if he may completely support women's equality. He's still a misogynist pig if he's not a feminist. This is why I really take issue with modern feminism. Um, Not to mention the fact sometimes it is outright misandry. I mean, there's no question about it. There is too many feminist extremists are allowed a voice, or at least are given a platform. The moderate feminists will say, "Oh, but they don't represent all of us. We don't all hate men." That's true. I know not all feminists hate men, but when extremists in a movement are allowed to become vocal, then the movement as a whole gets a negative reputation. So, in my opinion, there is not a need today for specific women's, for example, the Women's Party, Women's Equality Party. This is ridiculous because women have full legal equality. If they want to discuss issues that impact women disproportionately, that's okay. But to form a political party over it, I mean, to be divisive, how are they going to canvass male voters? You know, are they going to knock someone's door and say, "Oh, by the way, sir, please vote for us because we believe you're privileged"? Come on. So what I'm saying is, I'm very, very wary of any movement that is at its core divisive. I'm sick and tired of it, to be quite honest. I want to see men and women working together. I'm sick and tired of feminists peddling propaganda, and I do think they're going to try and hijack this film for their own agenda. That's a real pity. Um, in the same way, I would make an analogy in the same way that certain black groups would hijack the civil rights movement and use it to peddle their own agenda, which is pretty divisive as well. Which, for example, is against all white people. Um, it's similar to that. Throughout history, any civil rights movement, any humanitarian movement has has ultimately had to bring others on board. Now, there are feminists that are trying to do that. For example, Emma Watson in her He for She campaign, you could tell that there was a more diplomatic approach with that. Nevertheless, I think ultimately it came down to he for she, not he and she. That is a crucial difference. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I've been talking for a while here. If anyone wants to ask any questions about my position, feel free. Anyone wants to slander me, their comment will be deleted. That's how I roll. I allow my comment section to be open, but and just a quick word about two MRAs. I don't want you guys to misunderstand my position. I'm not saying that men's issues are not important. Of course they are, and I've frequently mentioned these issues. But I do stand by my view that some of the approaches are counterproductive, just as some um, feminist approaches are totally counterproductive.